Right, welcome to another edition of the Subseasonal Forecast Contest. We're doing it today on Wednesday at 12 o'clock, just to try different time for some folks who can't make it at other times during the week. Um, my name is David Margolin. For today, we're going to go through our normal forecast contest discussion, and then we're also going to talk about a couple of different development and research topics, including perhaps testing a seasonal forecast contest for this winter, testing the addition of user-defined maps. So a map to go with your forecast number, showing where there's going to be aboves and belows and that kind of thing. And then also we had a question about the fact that the GFS ensemble is now has undergone some changes in the past couple of weeks, including more ensemble members, changes to resolution, changes to lead window, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, so yeah, maybe we can even go out of order because I know, Phil, you said you had to leave a little bit early today, so we can talk about some of those things. And it's great to have Dave Darkangelo here, who obviously is very familiar with some of those topics too. So maybe let's start with the GEFS or the GFS ensemble. As I mentioned, I don't have all the details in front of me, but I do know that they did increase the ensemble size, right, from 20 to 30, and as Philip alluded to, I think they go out now. Was it like 35 days on the 0Z run, something like that? And I think Philip's question was, can we add that to the forecast contest or get access to the data? I think that's definitely something we should look at. There's no immediate plan to do that. Right now, of course, we're using the CFS data, but I think at least some of the testing that they did CPC, and Dave Darkangelo can probably talk about this in terms of what he's seen in the last few weeks. There's a good chance, right, that data is going to be better, right? It's the bar is not very high for the CFS, as we know, as we've seen with our own forecast skills. So, I think Philip, we can look at adding it. There's just some development piece, and of course, we have to get access to the data from our friends at Maxar. But I think all those things in theory are doable. We just have to sort of prioritize it and think about exactly, when to get it. But I should say too, in terms of the maps and things like that, of course, you're going to have access to a lot of that data on the Maxar website, right? Like they've already, kind of switched over to the GFS ensemble in terms of the 15 days. So at the very least, you can access some of that information through the map portal. Dave Darkangelo, do you have any additional thoughts you want to add?
Sure. It's a great idea. I think it's super to include that. I know from an industry perspective right now, that's being treated as a kind of a curiosity more than anything, rather than being like an actual, toolkit, added to the toolkit. The reason for that is the extended lead window up to day 35 was only for the 0Z run. And that's not a problem, but the problem is that when you don't see the extended days. So for example, the typical hour window out to 384 runs similar to typical GFS ensemble. It'll finish around 2:20 or so in the afternoon, 2:15. But the extra days don't process until the actual following day. And in fact, I don't even think we see day 34 until like the next night around 10 p.m. So you're looking at 26 or 27 hours after the initialization of that run. And you've seen in the interim, 3 subsequent runs, new runs out to hour 384. So it's kind of a weird offset. So that's probably why it's being treated kind of as more of a curiosity than anything else. So far from what I'm seeing, it's relatively, not surprisingly, it's very stable. Meaning there's kind of minor day-to-day differences in that kind of 16 to 34 day space. But nevertheless, kind of fun to look at. And I think it'll be kind of interesting this winter. So even though the data is on a huge delay compared to how we're seeing ensemble data, doesn't stop us from looking at it.
Follow-up question. What is the delay for the EC weeklies?
So the EC weeklies is, so if it's initially it's on a 0Z, it's roughly 12, 16 hours, maybe 15 hours, I'm thinking, something like that. But of course the EC weeklies you're seeing out to week 6. All the updates twice a week. This is a daily thing. So every 0Z GFS, GEFS ensemble runs out every night. Well, you see it the following night, but yeah, so the delay for the Euro is weekly. I think it's around 14 or so hours. I'll double check that.
Any other questions on that, Philip?
Just thinking about it right now in my head.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess that is a bit of an issue.
So, for instance, if we were making a if we were making
Yeah.
a forecast on like a Tuesday, if we had a deadline of Tuesday at noon, the most recent run you would be actually seeing is the 0Z Sunday evening initialized run. When you made now, my understanding is that, and this is maybe a question for Maxar. I know from the way that this data is being released, is it's being released in 7-day blocks, I believe. So that I've heard a rumor, I haven't confirmed this, from a vendor that at some point during the afternoon, you actually might be able to see our days like 16 to 22, and then maybe late afternoon days 23 to 30. It's still on a significant time delay, and I know you wouldn't see that until you'd be beyond the following day's 12Z run. That's a caveat. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing the data that way right now. I know there's a rumor that a few vendors may be accessing that data. So Frank, you'd see week 3, probably like, I don't know, this afternoon. Like I heard a rumor like 4 p.m. or something.
I was just trying to think of like the comparison to, like, since we know the EC weeklies are released every 2 days, so there's also sort of a difference where we forecast on Tuesday. I forget, does the EC weekly come out on Monday or Tuesday?
Monday and Thursdays.
Monday and Thursday. Okay, so we're also seeing like data for the previous day, but maybe not as much of a lag as, say, the GEFS.
Yeah, so for example, you're right. So when you made your forecast, you'd see, you would have seen the Euro week through week 6, but you at best might not even have seen the previous night's 0Z. I don't even think you'll see week 3 by the time our forecast deadline shows up.
Uh-huh.
And we're all questioning like the utility of this, right? Like, what was the utility of a day 15 GFS ensemble to begin with? And so like, well, what's the utility that of each subsequent day beyond that, knowing there's a significant lag? The answer is low, but I don't know how low. Wasn't a joke, by the way.
Yeah, but it was I mean, it would be, if I had my druthers, it would definitely be great to get in here, right? Because part of why we do this.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
No,
I agree. Data is important. I mean, another data point is obviously helpful.
Right.
Especially
Exactly.
Make humans potentially look better, huh, Dark?
Huh.
Anything we can get to help us make, if they want to push it out to like, if the rumor, I mean, not the rumor, but the plan is that this is going to become much more built into the cycle, and you're going to,
And Q1,
eventually.
Q2 of 21, ECWF is going to go daily.
That's right.
So, I mean, we have to condition our guys to bite on this junk already. Hopefully it'll get better.
Right. I heard a rumor that might be pushed to like May or June, but yeah, you're right. It's scheduled for first quarter.
And so far, I mean, it's early, really early, but the extended GFS ensemble looks like the same old pile of junk. So I'm not super jazzed. Absolutely get it into the mix so we can have more quantitative stuff to throw at it. But I think, clustering and trying to pick out the kernels of corn in the turd of the forecast overall distribution is going to be the exercise that the human meteorologist is going to have to go through with these things.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, Philip, is that helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so it's one of those things. We'll put it on the backlog. I think we all agree. Ideally, it'd be great to have it in here, just if for no other reason, to be able to compare the performance and good, bad, or ugly, right? But probably it's not going to happen tomorrow. But we'll see. And in the meanwhile, you have access to some of that data in the Maxar. And if you do, I'll just add that if you do want to do a very specific research initiative on it, let me know, because then, we might be able to talk to Maxar about getting you that data with a little bit more urgency. All right.
Dave, real quick question
Yeah.
on that front. You have an MJO-based forecast methodology or algorithm in here, right?
That's right. Yeah, an analog MJO input. Yep.
Okay, and its input is off of the RMM index observations or forecasts out to the 16 to 20 lag zero?
No, it is just the observations.
Okay.
It's a function of the observations, and then it
Right.
yep.
Because my wrinkle to the load of crap that I'm dumping at the feet of climate models, that's primarily for their 2-meter temp forecasts over places we care about a lot. The utility of the climate models has shown to be much greater when you start looking at hub molars of VP, and that goes back to my diatribe last week. So I think there's a lot more value that can be gleaned when looking at 200 millibar VP hub molars from the Euro out through week 3, 4, the CFS, and perhaps even the GFS family.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would be nice to kind of follow up a little bit. Here's our little MGO analog input here. It actually this summer, for what it's worth, it performed pretty well compared to some of the other forecasts. Yeah, I think there's a lot more we can do with it, right? Again, like I mentioned, it is only based on the historical obs, but yeah, perhaps we can do some stuff with the dynamic guidance or some sort of forecast or expectation. Okay. What else? So that's the GEFS. Why don't we get a couple of the housekeeping things out of the way? One other thing we've talked about adding, this came from some feedback and some ideas from some of the group. This is not operational yet, but there's been a lot of talk about adding a map, some sort of map feature that folks can use. So this is something we're testing in the background. You can see down here where the idea would be, it's hard to just draw a map, but a way around that is we kind of use a little bit like a regional kind of things, like a GIS type thing. So imagine this is your blank map, and it doesn't have to be these defined regions, but these are EIA regions, so it's nice and easy. Your East, Midwest, South Central, Mountain Pacific, and the idea is for each of those regions, the user, the forecaster has to put in aboves, below, normal, right? Above, and this is in demand, above, below, normal, demand. So pretty simple to do. It just adds a couple seconds. And the value to this, right, is, the whole idea of being right for the wrong reason or whatever, you got the HDDs right or the CDDs right, but you really didn't get the pattern right. Well, this is going to help provide color on that, no pun intended, right? So we're going to be able to dissect better. Hey, did I get the pattern right? I was thinking, ridge trough or trough ridge, and let's go back. Let's go see how it all worked out and stuff, and hopefully learn from it. So the idea is you plug it in here, and then you hit, with all your other information like you normally do, hit submit, and then let me go to the output to see the output. All right, so this is a test page, but it might look something like this. So we'll have maps on the right side. ECM, WF, CFS, have their own maps. Obviously, it's not user defined. Those are, from the dynamic guidance. But, the forecasters will have now their own forecast maps. So like, for example, for Zach, if I click on, all the other information is the same, by the way, so all this should be the same. But if I click on forecast map, it should let me know what Zach's map was. So, and maybe we could spruce this up a little bit, but you could see that Zach was, this is a test map, but Zach was forecasting below normal demand for the coasts. This is like opposite. I was thinking if this was a political map, it might be opposite, right? But all right, we'll skip that. But red, below normal demand on the coast, and above normal demand in the middle part of the country, normals down there in Texas. So I wanted to share with this group, just anyone have any feedback on this, good, bad, ugly, ideas for improvement?
I like it. But I think we might have to split the East into Northeast and Southeast, given how climatologically the regions are rather different.
So somewhere near that Mason-Dixon line, put in a
Roughly, yeah.
add a region or something like that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yep. Anyone else? Maybe we could do the state boundaries too. It's kind of hard to see the state. Well, you can't see the states, obviously. But we might be able to do something like that where you can see the states. Anyone else want to provide any feedback? Hate the idea? Anyone? Yeah, anyone see any red flags, like they hate the idea? Obviously it's meant to add value, not just more work for the user. So if you think it's cumbersome, if you think it's not worth it, please chime in or just email me offline and just let me know. Otherwise, we may test this out in another week or two. So just, you can just look for it. Oh, one other thing. You'll notice I took, on this test page, I took out the expected pattern. Where is it? Like if you go, let's go to forecast. This is I took out the expected pattern. But I've had second thoughts on that after talking to some other folks. Go to, where did I put that page? Oh, here. Sorry, I think actually, because the expected pattern is more of a global thing, right? Like, hey, I expect negative NAO, I expect EPO, whatever it is, right? That's more of a global thing. Whereas this, this down here, I think it's just more what works, are local to the United States. So, in second thought, I think we can still keep the sort of the global pattern expectation, because I think that's useful for folks who are, I think it's part of the process, right? You talk to end users and they want to know what are the drivers, what negative NAO, things like that. But of course, at the end of the day, you also want to know regionally what's going on across the United States. There's sensitivities there too. So I'm thinking about keeping both of those. I just wanted to add that. Okay, I'm going to move on unless anyone wants to chime in with anything else on that.
One more crazy thought here.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. In terms of verifying this, I don't know how possible it might be to do this, but maybe some kind of metric where if you get it right, you get like a separate skill score where you have a +1 every time you get a hit. And then if you're wrong, then you get like a minus or something. And then you have like a cumulative list of numbers of how you did on the pattern configurations. I don't know if that might be way too complicated, or
no,
if something like that might be feasible.
It isn't too, I mean, it's a great point. I totally forgot to mention, like, well, what about verification? The idea is absolutely to have verification at some point. I think it'd be really cool. And I think really useful and helpful and enlightening. And I'm just speaking for myself. Like, I wonder how I would do forecasting the actual pattern 16 to 20 days out. I'm scared to know based on my HDD scores. But yes, so absolutely. And let's save that for another conversation, just because that's going to be a different development cycle and it's going to take a little bit more work. But I think it's absolutely doable. I think you're right. Like, you get a point if you get it exactly. Maybe you get 1 point if you miss the category by 1. You could also miss by 2 categories. Maybe we do some sort of scaling there, or something like that. We can look at all those things, but I think keeping it as simple as possible makes sense. we don't want to get too complicated, especially as first. So I like your idea. I like the general idea there, Philip. But that also reminds me, one of the reasons why I also wanted to do EIA is because we're going to need verification scores, right? We're going to need data. And you can see this is Maxar. Maxar, forecast already has things regionalized by the EIA. So one argument to keep it exactly the same is just it will be easier for us to get this into production because they already have these regions customized. So if I come back to you, Philip, in a week and say, hey, initially, let's just do this, that's probably going to be the reason why. Cool. Okay.
Makes sense.
All right, and one last thing, since we're on topic, and I'm going to turn this over to Michael, if Michael doesn't mind. And Michael was, I think, one of the guys who came up with this idea. Michael, do you want to share? And again, we can still some feedback from Philip, Jason, Dave. The idea that for this a beta seasonal forecast for this winter. Do you just want to provide a little bit more information on that to the group, maybe 2-3 minutes, and then we can see if anyone has questions.
Yeah, I'll give it the old college try, as they say. All right, so I'll just start from the beginning. So my idea was that we should have a basically a winter forecast. It started out only as my idea anyway, as having a map kind of similar to the public AccuWeather forecast where they got the snow here, warm there, whatever. But we developed it into more of a seasonal thing where we have the HDD forecast December, January, February, and forecasting that with whatever metrics or you want to use with you can have my idea was to have you can have maps, have a whole presentation for it if you want, all optional of course, nothing required at all, because maps can be difficult to put together and all that good stuff. But so basically the idea is by I don't think we have a set date for anything, but in our hypotheticals, around November 15th, the idea would be to have your HDD forecast in for the December, January, February period, and by November 15th, also you would have we could either do a presentation on it or give your 2 minutes or 3 minutes, however much time we give. We haven't worked that out yet either. And everyone will be able to see the numbers everyone put. There was also some talk, I believe, of having a few industry people. I think Dave was considering volunteering for this, and having a few of the industry people put their forecast out a little bit earlier, just so that other people with less experience with this can see what an industry winter forecast looks like, and some of the stuff that goes into that. So then, so like I said, you get your forecast in by November 15th. There's also a subset to that where I believe every once a month at the 15th you give your the next month's HDD output. So when December 15th comes along, you give a January HDD number, February, no, January, I skipped February. January comes along, you give a February HDD number, and so on. I believe we're also doing that for December, right, Dave?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
toying with the idea of either doing like a monthly update or updating the seasonal. I think we're still debating that a little bit. In other words, you put out your first DSJAM Feb on November 15th, and then just like you might have to on the desk, whatever, you update it on December 15th. You update it on January 15th, either the monthlies or the season as a whole. Yep.
Yeah. So everything else will be relatively similar. You know, there'll be a mean, a sigma. We're planning on providing all of the data, the 30-year averages, 10-year averages. It's all on Maxar, but we'll provide that to you. You know, like I said, it'll be the same. You'll just have a much bigger mean and spread. You know, you might want to add a 0 to the ends of those numbers on the screen there. Formula statement, it'll be the, you know, whatever, these things will all be pretty much exactly the same. The only other thing that I'll just mention here, and we talked about this in length for a couple of meetings, is you will have the option to go do as little or as much um, as with this as you want. So let's say you've got some free time and you want to really make it look cool. You know, you can put a whole bunch of maps, get this whole presentation together. You know, use whatever data you want. But if you don't have that much time, you know, you can not do it at all, or you can just, you know, put bare bones and just kind of put a range and a number generator and just put that out and say that. I mean, you know, you never know what you might find out with these things. But let's see, is that it? I think that's it. Dave, did I forget anything?
No, I think that's it. I mean, we're trying to keep it as absolutely simple as possible, just to test something. And like I said, there were a few folks who asked about, like, you know, a seasonal, and we thought it might be kind of fun and perhaps educational, and we thought it might be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of we already have, you know, available. We have most of the data. Seasonal forecasting. We're not going to make everyone do this once a week because, you know, again, we're just testing this out. It would just be at most an update once a month, that kind of thing. So I think that's it. And again, we obviously we have to make a decision soon because of you know, we're getting toward winter. But does anyone have any feedback in general on the idea, good, bad, or ugly?
I mean, folks taking a stab at it isn't a terrible idea. You know, Dave, from an industry perspective, the seasonal forecast is a necessary evil. Absent a strong INSO background state, one would argue there's not a lot of physically based skill there to extract, and you can get yourself in trouble more than do yourself favors by trying to tackle that. Managing the message as it rolls forward is more of our value added component, and that's where the subseasonal stuff comes in. So, you know, if you have connection to some folks with some novel or semi-novel methodologies that they want to, you know, throw out there and get some exposure to, I think we'd all, you know, certainly like to take a look at that. But having non-experienced student forecasters try, you know, seasonal forecasting right now, I think it's blind leading the blind a little bit.
Yeah, fair. I mean, it's pretty challenging even for the best of us, right? And if anything, I think there's an interesting psychological impact. I think Jason didn't quite go there, but you know, my experience, in some cases, I feel like where it's gotten me in more trouble, forget the fact that my seasonal forecast was wrong, but it influenced my shorter range forecast. And I know that doesn't seem intuitive necessarily, but again, I'm just speaking from my own experience, although I suspect this has happened to other folks, where I had maybe whatever, a significant view on the seasonal. And so I allowed it to influence my short and in particular medium range. Like if I was going for a cold winter and I saw a 16 to 20 day map that leaned cold, I was more likely, I would put maybe an overabundance of weight on it. I would allow the seasonal to overly weight it, and you know, that got me into trouble. So anyway, it's just is interesting the impacts the seasonal I think has had even on your shorter range forecast. Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts in terms of the seasonal? Again, we're just toying with the idea right now.
It does seem like it'd be a interesting exercise for students to go through, just to see what kinds of inputs you would need to investigate, and just to also see the outcome, just how difficult it would be to actually do well and beat something like a climatology forecast. I guess the danger is, I mean, if you're doing this it's the sample size, right? So you could be lucky and pick some numbers that turn out well, but that was just one season. And, maybe the next 10 forecasts you made over the next 10 years on November 15th would be terrible, but you just kind of lucked out on that first one. So that's the sort of the challenge with all these longer term forecasts. Unlike, say, the weather challenge, which is every day, pretty much just a one-day forecast, you get instant feedback, and it's a lot easier to learn from your mistakes when you make the mistake one day in advance as opposed to a season in advance, or even the 2 to 3 weeks in advance, like the regular subseasonal contest. So that's sort of the challenge for maybe on the student side is, I think it's important to learn from our mistakes, but it's harder to do that the fewer forecasts there are. And at the end of the winter, I have to go back. What was I thinking back in November? That was a long time ago. It's just a little trickier to get that feedback loop with these longer time ranges, which is especially important, I think, for students.
Yeah, I completely agree, and you're right, and that is a limitation. And I think the way we try to offset that, right, is of course requiring methods and research and things like that. So you have to open up about where you're coming from. And one of the things that I think is important, Michael alluded to the fact that having those iterative updates. I think again, a challenge of seasonal forecasting is, sometimes also it's human nature, especially humans putting out these forecasts. You're stubborn, right? Like if you start off in October or November and put out a really, really cold forecast, you want that to verify. And again, I'm just speaking from my own experience. In some cases, it's been very hard for me to change my forecast because I want it to verify, right? I so want it, and bias creeps in. And I think this is why I think if we do this, I think it's important to have those updates and to score. Like at the end of this, to score, not just based on your initial forecast, but to have some sort of scaling so that your iterative updates are scored too, because that's how it is in industry. In other words, it's about adapting, right? The best forecaster that I've worked with was actually the best who was able to adapt. He was able to say, you know what, I know I said it was going to be cold. I'm completely changing my forecast. I think some of those guys are the best out there. And so we should score it that way too, because that's how you're going to be able to help your client, your industry, being able to adapt and not just necessarily being the guy who's just going to hold on to a forecast even after the data has left the horse has left the corral, so to speak. Okay. Yeah, I know we're off on a tangent a little bit here, but the feedback's pretty helpful. Why don't we, and feel free to, again, email, jump in if you have any other ideas. But for the rest of the meeting, why don't we switch back here? How about we skip, just for today, we'll skip attribution just for time. Let's go to the forecast here. And it's interesting, I was looking at this earlier. So today, or this, these are the forecasts. Let me zoom in a little bit, or zoom out, I guess. These are forecasts, again, that were made a couple of days ago from October 20th. I'll sort it. And you can see here, there's, and just quick caveat, please put a little asterisk next to these persistence. I think a couple of these persistence may have a little bug, but so let's ignore the persistence for the moment. But you can see we have a range here from 82 on the cold side, 82 HDDs, down to 65, Matt Lanza at 65 HDDs. So a pretty decent spread here in terms of the HDDs. And the 30, just looking at the benchmarks here, this was interesting. I think Philip pointed this out, who had to leave the meeting. But I had to double check this to make sure this is right. The 10-year normal is actually slightly higher. These are Maxar numbers than the 30-year normal, 77.9 versus 77.5. So interesting. They're very close, but actually the 10 years is a little higher. I guess just based on the fact that the last 10 years during this target window, there was actually some cooler weather. All right, so let's I guess let's talk about the forecast here. I don't know, Dr. Decker, since you were the last one to talk here, do you want to give us an overview of your forecast rationale here for this period?
Sure. So as always, I go with that CPC forecast and try to turn it into a number. That was particularly tricky this time around because we have a mix of both above and below normal temperatures in that forecast. With highly populated areas covered in the below normal conditions, and then for the most part, either sparsely populated areas or areas like Phoenix that probably aren't contributing any HGDs anyway in that area of above normal, or Southern California. There's a limit to how low those HGDs can go before you hit zero, no matter how warm it gets. So I weighted the below normal a bit more than it seems like I should if I just look at the size of the red versus the blue on this screen. But after accounting for both the population there in the southern eastern seaboard region versus Idaho and Wyoming, and then also accounting for basically subtracting from my mind the desert Southwest regions and the West Coast of California, I decided that probably there's a little bit more below normal. The below normal really should be weighted a lot more than it just looks like looking at this map. So I ended up going pretty close to climatology. It was kind of a wash after I sort of bumped up my weighting of the below normal to account for the population and the climatology. And so I ended up in between the 30-year normal and the 30-year moving average. So essentially it's a climatology type forecast, or pretty close to that. And I bumped up my uncertainty a little bit, my sigma there, to account for both some of just my own uncertainty in exactly where these population areas may or may not fall within those areas. But also, if that area of cold centered in the Southeast were to be a little larger, suddenly you have places like Chicago or New York or maybe even Dallas that start getting into the below normal and really bumping up the HDDs on the population weighted basis. So that's how I came up with my numbers.
And your confidence number, is that, I'm sorry, what would you say your confidence is?
So I bumped it, I increased the sigma. So
Yeah.
my confidence has decreased from the climatological values a little bit. So I bumped representing less confidence.
Okay.
For instance.
All right. Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Decker? All right.
So this is basically transforming the CPC outlook into a quantitative 16 to 20. That's Dr. Decker?
Right, exactly. That's my approach. And yep.
And it's a 3 to 4 week.
Right. It's not even the right time. It's
right.
Right. So there's the extra uncertainty there too.
Okay.
It's definitely not the most sophisticated approach, probably.
Yep.
It's worth noting that Dr. Decker has had some pretty good success with this strategy relative to, well, certainly relative to me and relative to a lot of folks here. I think Dr. Decker was, there's the cooling season. So right there in terms of forecasts, forecasting like 2/3 or higher. You've got, and this is the final actual season total here. This last week was the last CDD verification, so we're gonna do some little special announcement. But you had Maxar there, which is just above Dr. Decker, and then Matt Lanza performed well in his forecast there. But those were the top performers, at least in terms of net performance. if you look at it in terms of directional correctness, Paul Roundy, Dr. Roundy, winner, chicken dinner. Paul Roundy at 86% had the highest in terms of the directionally correct relative to 30-year normal. Nick up here he participated in 10 forecasts and was at 100%. So kudos to those guys there. All right, let's see. Let's go back here. Yeah, Jason, I know you didn't like make a forecast here officially, but oops, sorry, let me go back to 20th. Yeah, do you want to share your thoughts? I mean, I think it's interesting, Jason, you know, and obviously you're looking at this kind of stuff every day. This is a couple days old, but you know, you got Matt Rogers up here at 79 HDDs, and then you've got your Maxar down here at 67 HDDs. So even just in terms of some of our friendly industry guests here, there's a decent spread, right?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of moving parts and uncertainty going into the end of October, early November. I always, being a GSDM disciple, always try to come back to the first and second order forcing components to where, you know, I think the primary North Pacific to North American wave train adjustments should adhere. So I kind of lean towards the warmer side. I would take the under on the 30 and 10 year. I'd probably be down there closer to Maxar than Matt Rogers. My read on the situation is the second half of October here has been dominated by what I would consider to be some pretty interesting multiplicative noise, a series of rather fast but influential eastward propagating tropical convective modes crossing the central and eastern Pacific, contributing to neutral to negative tilt, mid-latitude eddies, you know, pattern features within the mean flow that have driven repetitive ridging up through the Gulf of Alaska, eastern Alaska, northwest Canada. I see that situation changing going into the first half of November, and I don't see the evidence right now to continue that sort of feeding the bull. I see the repetitive eastward propagating mode train across the Central Pacific coming to a halt, low frequency convective forcing going back, you know, being more dominant over the Eastern Hemisphere, kind of limping eastward from the Eastern Indian Ocean into the Indonesian area. I see atmospheric annual momentum following back lower, and thus more of a positive tilt character to polar jet stream flow eddies. And I think that's not good to maintain a connection to polar air. And if you're not going to have polar air connection in mid-November, and you're not going to have any kind of, you know, negative EPO kind of process, then I think that's a warm one. The little added components that I think can help modulate the gas-weighted HDD and North American pattern outcome, there's pretty good evidence across the majority of global ensemble means to send the AO and NAO back positive. It would appear that we've gone through a 2 to 3 week period of, for lack of a better term or description, attacking the hell out of the early season vertically integrated polar vortex spin up process. Been very weak up there. Been a lot of positive height anomalies floating around at higher latitudes, and there's some dynamical model evidence to suggest that that process takes a break going through the first half of November, and that you actually get a pretty decent spin up of the strap PV that might connect to the upper trope. And this kind of jives a little bit with relaxing the eastward propagating mode of convective forcing series of events that we've seen crossing the Central Pacific. I also think there was some help from recurving Westpac and Western Atlantic tropical cyclones that helped inject some additional amplitude into the Northern Hemispheric polar jet wave train. As we quiet that down after Epsilon and quiet the Westpac down a little bit more, I think you lose some amplitude in the overall polar jet structure as well. So yeah, I'd be down. I'm going to go under. I'm kind of warm leaning.
I think that's pretty clear skew there in terms of who, which side Jason's favoring. Any questions for Jason in terms of his thought process there, methodology? Huh? What about Dave? Are you still on, Dark Angelo? I think you were on. You actually put a number out here. You look like you were on the lower in Jason's camp there too. Anything you want to add there?
You know, he did a really thorough job. So you know, I'm in agreement. I'm in a pretty warm view here, and I kind of agree with his caveats. To me, it doesn't look like we're going to calm the Westpac yet, but I concur that the Westpac, what's occurring there now, what looks to occur in the next, say, 10 days is not adding to, you know, the amplitude of the jet structure across East Asia and the Pacific. And without that, you know, and then the collapse of the AO-NAO complex, you know, I think we look to, you know, go through a milder window here. And concur with the idea that this, you know, the stratospheric polar, you know, polar vortex is going through a cycle, and maybe it completes that, and we try to rebuild that on the other side. And when I say the other side, it's like something out over forecast horizon. So I don't know, week 4, 5, maybe 6 at this point. At some point, I think we'll rebuild that, but I don't know the timing on that.
Okay. Let's see. Any questions for Dave, I guess, on that?
Yeah, Dave. There's, I guess, there's been some minor discussion about, you know, the back of the 11 and 15. Some of the ensemble means trying to hint at some positive high anomalies floating back northward towards the pole, east of Scandinavia, you know, northwest Russia, you know, that Barents Sea area that some other folks like to talk about in some research with low sea ice. You know, I think that is an interesting hint. There's also a little bit of a hint for East Asian troughing, and so potentially some you know, positive East Asian mountain torque, you know, eventual influence to try and extend the pack jet down the road. But I worry that there's going to be a price to pay for quieting down the series of eastward propagating convective modes that have crossed the Pacific, and it'll take a little more time to overcome what looks like, you know, more positive slanted EPO to go along with the positive AO and NAO period. So, you know, mid-Nova is probably too fast for me to bring cold back. You know, maybe late Novi, and then Dees, I think it's interesting. We'll see the, you know, the strength of the La Nina will be interesting, not just because it's an index, but more because of, you know, what the actual sea surface temperature totals look like around the date line. As we all know, there are different flavors of INSO, and ultimately the rubber meets the road where you have good focus convection and the higher altitude you know, convective outflows that provide the mechanism to exchange heat and momentum from the tropics into the mid latitudes. If we can keep, say, INSO 4 in the west part of INSO 3.4 pretty warm, then December could get pretty interesting to the colder side from a surprise angle in terms of what people are expecting with a strong La Nina background and what climate models have shown. Anomalies are cool, but we can't forget that it's the outright temp that's going to matter for wet bulb and thus support for actual persistent convection. So you can still be slightly below normal out there near the date line, but keep temps, sea surface temps over 80, 81, and support some decent convective clusters that can give you some nice RWDs and still support a meridional arcing wave train that can favor ridging in Western Canada.
Hey, I know we're almost out of time. I had one question. I think it was Dave who mentioned this. Dave, are you I know there's debate in terms of this, how the stratosphere influences the troposphere, and vice versa, I guess, but in particular strat to the trope. It sounded like you were looking at the stratosphere already as a modulator potentially of weather. Is that the case? And I guess the reason I ask is because it's it's October, right? It feels a little bit early, but do you think that the stratosphere and the stratospheric vortex can influence tropospheric weather even at this time of year?
Am I on? You guys can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's too early. I think October is a month that we start to form the early chapters of that book. But I think we have to go through multiple iterations of this, and while maybe a very early iteration or the prologue was for a weaker stratospheric vortex, that looks like it's flipping around and we're going into a bit of a hostile environment, or the inability of I think we're going to go through a period of inability to see the strat influence the trope. And there's other things going on too. So everything's operating on kind of slightly different timescales, but it looks like it's going into, at least temporarily, a hostile environment. So, Jason and I could probably, debate, into the night over, at some point, could that break down, or is there a pathway there in the future to get cold? And I think it seems like we both agree that it would. But getting these timescales right on as these things decay and advance and propagate through the pattern, is a huge challenge. And not to mention, it goes back to what Jason was saying, which is that, you're going to see some significant influences that come out of this, equatorial tropical Pacific anomaly. And I don't really think we have a sense of kind of where the magnitude of that will fall here in 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. And that'll add another layer of challenge.
Okay. Interesting area of research for sure. All right. Well, it's 1 o'clock and I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. Thank you for everyone here for participating, in particular Dave and Jason, for adding your input in terms of the season and maybe some windows of opportunity here again into December. Those are things we can talk about more in the coming weeks. And hopefully we'll see some of you guys again next week. So thank you, everyone.
Later, Daves.
All right.
Nice to hear from you, Dark. Take it easy, man.
Bye, guys.
Yep. See you guys. Thanks.
Bye.
See you.